Hello, everyone, and welcome to Peter and Debra are doing a podcast, or is it Debra and Peter are doing a podcast? I can never remember, and it doesn't matter, does it? With me, Debra Alcott-Tyler, and my twinny, Peter Wanley.
Oh, hi, Debra. I was incredibly fortunate with my travel. Most of them who were coming from London were booked onto an earlier Eurostar than me, which got cancelled, and then they all had to rebook later than me, and I just sailed through and arrived on time, no problem at all. And then on the way back, they were all booked in one carriage and I was booked in another carriage. Now, this isn't because I've got some grand kind of ticket that's better than all of theirs, but my ticket must have been booked at a different time. And their carriage was taken out of service because it had no air conditioning. So they all got, this time they didn't get delayed, they got accelerated. So they all had to go back earlier than was expected. And again, I just kind of sailed through. And when I arrived at the terminal at Brussels, there were all these hot and harassed people whose trains had been cancelled as well. And I just got straight. So it's not like that. I don't feel particularly lucky in my transport stories, but this week, from a travel point of view, it all went extremely well.
The travel gods smiled on you, Peter, this week.
They did. There was a late night football match involving Belgium, which Belgium won right in the very, very end of the game. Which was late into the night in Brussels, and that provoked lots of car horn tooting and general merriment by all and sundry. So that was quite fun, but rather noisy in the centre of Brussels. And that has been my week.
Oh, how exciting. I must admit, like for me personally, if I've ever been to a conference and spent like a day with a whole load of people, or, people I work with, the last thing I want to do is sit with them on the train on the way home. Isn't that awful of me? But it's true. In fact, to be perfectly honest, I don't like having to talk to people on the train anyway, regardless of who I'm travelling with, even if it's my family or something. And so, I would do anything at all to avoid ending up in the same carriage as somebody else. Isn't that terrible? But it's true. I've spent the day with them, and the travel now is my way to unwind and let go and all the rest of it. And you sort of feel obliged to chat to people. If I get on a train and I see somebody I know, my heart sinks. And I have to try and pretend I haven't noticed them. And it's not because I don't like people, but I think sometimes, especially on trains, when you can hear other people's conversations, especially colleagues, you so often hear them talking about work.
Yeah, it's one of the things I quite like about going to cricket is listening to other people's conversations. Yeah. Although I realise now that I tend to sit in the same place at Taunton, so I hear the same people telling the same stories over and over again. And it was very, very hot. Obviously, a week or so ago, and I sat on the other side of the ground in the shade just because it was intolerably hot on the other side, and it was quite refreshing, not to join the conversations, but to listen into other people's anecdotes and other people's stories, and that's quite fun.
Yeah, it is quite fun, actually. You're right. Some of the things people talk about are hilarious, absolutely hilarious. But it's people forget on the train, like people on the phone. They forget this is a public place. We can hear you talking about your dickhead, managing director who's really pissed you off because of whatever. I sort of say, you can hear the massive row you're having with your wife about the fact you're late home and a bit pissed. And you sort of think, don't do it. Do not use the train to have conversations with anybody about anything, because there are people listening in and judging. They're judging you. I certainly do. I'm judging. Anyway, so what else has happened? Well, I went to the wonderful Caroline Slocock's book launch this week. So she wrote a book, I'm sure you know, Peter, called People Like Us, which was like a feminist perspective on Margaret Thatcher's time, and so easy to read. So I really recommend it. Whatever you think about Margaret Thatcher,
I'm ashamed to say I haven't read it. I know Caroline because we worked together at the Department for Education back in the day after she had been the private secretary. She worked, and I think she worked in early years education or something like that. Anyway, she was part of that kind of glorious period at education. But maybe I should read that one. But she's got another book out.
She has, exactly, which is where I was last night at the launch of it. And she had a very illustrious guest list, Peter, I have to say, which you would expect. So the book was introduced by Anthony Seddon, Sir Anthony Seddon, I should say, who readers will know, the historian, sometimes quite a controversial figure, but very well known. And then Margaret Hodge popped in. Julia Unwin was there. My ex-colleague, Bronwyn, who, do you remember Peter? She used to work with me years ago, and she's now the head of strategy at the UK Space Agency, which is like the coolest job ever. I'm so jealous. And the people like Paul Farn was there, Andrew Hind, who used to be, as you know, Chief Executive of the Charity Commission. So it's a very illustrious group. And like a woman called Melanie Field, I don't know if you come across her, but she also she's been a civil servant for many years, was at the AHRC for a while. And she was, she's one of those people I find like awe, I'm in awe of her because she's so clever and so, grounded. So, but also so passionate about things. So yeah, it was a good night. But anyway, so this is the book, Bad Government, and How to Make It Better, which I already started on the journey home. I got stuck in, and it was already, it was written from a wonderful perspective. I haven't read the book yet, so I can't tell you any of the content, but it's got off to a very good start, talking about, her and she talks about government, kind of what are the things that go wrong, really. But she also looks at it, but it's almost like a memoir as well about her time in government and the people she worked with and the things that they did. So, so I'm looking forward to finishing that off probably this weekend.
Oh, well, that's good. Well, I've also, life has been slightly dominated by a book in the last week to 10 days. So Five Rights' founder and president, Baroness Kidron, has published a book, I think I might even have mentioned it last week, called Users, How Big Tech Took Control and How to Fight Back. And it's various, it's the story of her around about the time she was appointed to the House of Lords as a crossbench peer and was still a famous, film producer. She observes these young girls sitting around her kitchen table, looking at one another, looking at phones rather than playing outside or talking to one another, and then she made a film investigating what's going on here and what's going on in these young people's lives, which became over time a kind of passionate commitment to asking the question, do we serve technology or does technology serve us? And she's pro-tech, but explores in really clear and compelling ways the misalignment between how companies are organizing online products and services to maximize their profits. And they talk about being innovative, but actually what they're doing is closing down bits of what was envisaged to be this amazingly kind of democratic and open space to control and manipulate. As Nelson Mandela said, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. But actually, and the Five Rights Foundation is a sort of expression of her commitment and determination to do something with that. But the book goes much wider into even as and when we sort it out for children, the issues and challenges of the way in which these companies are harnessing the technology for the benefit of a small number of very powerful men is fascinating. And so it's a racy read, but within it, there's a particularly entertaining and enjoyable chapter, which you could do a series of podcasts about, called The 10 Plays of the Lobbying Playbook. So of these 10 plays from the Lobbying Playbook, just to give you a couple of examples, which I'm sure you'll recognize, that government often pulls together panels to advise them on a particular topic, and Baroness Kidron gives a great example of someone from the campaigning charity sector not being allowed to be on this advisory panel because they clearly are self-interested and have a view on the topic. But you would never say of a private sector company that they had, a view or an insight. So it's legitimate to be an expert with some perspectives, but in others you're seen as kind of singular. So there's an interesting section on that. There's another one which I think charities need to be alive to, and that's all around buying off the opposition. So our contention as the Five Rights Foundation, and I think increasingly the debate about online services is focusing in on the design features of these products and services and the way in which they manipulate and exploit people for money or whatever it might be. And there's a period that she describes where she's arguing in opposition with the Samaritans, because the Samaritans have been given a lot of money to help the resilience of people who have been exploited or have suffered as a consequence of the technology. So this ability to set well-meaning, effective civil society organizations up against one another, because one organization is tackling the consequences of what's fundamentally wrong with these products while the other is trying to sort out the fundamentals. It's not that either is wrong, but fomenting this kind of debate and tension and splitting people apart. It's very well written, and you read it and think, oh yeah, I've seen that happen.
Oh, I'm definitely going to read it now then. Anything that gives us tips. Yeah, so the other thing that I came across this week was an article in Third Sector about an employee, a fundraiser, who was employed by a cancer charity, and she lied about her qualifications for the job, or not, but her references, I think, actually. I don't know about her qualifications. So she faked her references. And then she also lied about the work that she'd been doing. So she told the charity she'd been applying for these grants, we were just waiting to hear, and it turns out that she hadn't applied for any of them at all. And what she then did was, I mean, I'm imagining it's because she knew she was going to get caught out. So she faked cancer in order to like draw attention, to like have people feeling sorry for her and stuff like that, and then went off sick and then basically never reappeared again. Anyway, she's been in the courts and she's been found guilty, and I think she's going to serve a custodial sentence, because one of the things the judge said was that she very nearly destroyed the charity because she actually wasn't raising the funds that the charity needed in order to function. So they thought they had prospects out there of money coming in. Anyway, it struck me because many years ago, I mean, gosh, 15, probably maybe more years ago at DSC, we had a member of staff, I won't name the individual, but she was Australian originally. And she came to work for us. She was very popular. Everybody really liked her. She was working in like an admin role. And she was really popular. Everybody liked her. And then one day she suddenly said that she had cancer, that she had cervical cancer, I think it was. And she got loads of sympathy and lots of support. And, we said to her, when you have your cancer, she said, I want to come into work. Because we said, no, you don't need to come into work when you have it. No, I want to come in, she said. So we used to pay for a cab to pick her up outside now I can't remember the name of the hospital, but it'll come back to me, but outside this hospital to bring her to work. So after she's had her treatment, so that she didn't have to, get on public transport when she'd just been through it. Anyway, and there's a couple of times when she pretended to collapse. And one time she pretended to collapse and, they put her on the sofa in my office. And I said, well, we need to call an ambulance. She was like, absolutely not. I don't need an ambulance. Please don't call the ambulance. And I was like, we're going to have to, so we called the ambulance anyway, and she wouldn't let them come anywhere near her. So please don't touch me. So we said to them, she's going through cancer treatment at the moment, so probably a bit sensitive. So they said, fine. They didn't push it and they disappeared off. Anyway, all of this, went on over several months, Peter. And then she said that I can't remember what the reason was, but she basically said something about she wasn't able to live in the same place she was before. So one of my colleagues, one of our directors, had a spare room in his house. So she said, well, you can come and stay with me in my spare room whilst you're looking for, what's going on. Otherwise, you're looking for a place to stay. Anyway, she stayed with him for like quite a long time. But then one day he came into the office. He came to me and said, boss, I need to have a word with you. And I'm like, okay, what's happened? He said, I think she's faking it. And I was like, what on earth makes you think that? He said, but it's just that, when she says she's gone through these treatments, when she's come back, nothing seems different. And the way in which she describes it. And I was like, no, I'm sorry, John. I think you must be misreading it. What would a man know about a woman's, cancer? But, in a woman's bit. Anyway, and then she said that she had to fly back to Australia for to have surgery, and that she wanted to have the surgery in Australia. Again, all this was very plausible. In fact, that's the other thing. She faked a medical doctor, because we said we need a certificate from your doctor, a letter basically saying the treatment you were going through, just for our records and because it's the right thing to do. So she faked a letter. I think it was Brompton Hospital or something. And of course, which, anyway, so we had all that. So it made absolute sense to us. So we said, absolutely fine. And then she said, could I, when I get paid, can I be paid in cash? Because it'll just be a lot easier for me, because my bank account in America, I think, and Australia is, again, I can't remember the detail of the lie, but that's what she said. So our finance director said, can we pay her in cash? I'm like, well, if we're not breaking any rules, then yeah, why not? Of course, she can have the money how she wants it anyway. So she cashed her check, and that was the last we ever saw or heard of her. So then we were like, we couldn't get in touch with her. There were no numbers in Australia. We didn't know when she was coming back. And then my executive office manager at the time then contacted the hospital where she was having treatment to see if they had records of her. And it turns out she'd never been treated by them. And also the hospital, I think it was Brompton, wasn't even a cancer hospital. Actually, we would have found out if we'd have just checked the hospital. But you trust people, don't you?
Well,
but what was so interesting about it was absolutely devastating for my staff, because they really liked her and they really believed her. And Ruby, one of our customer service folk who, was really close to her, so she thought. And Ruby was an older woman and quite religious. And, she was every weekend, she would hold a prayer group in her church to pray for this particular individual to recover and stuff like that. And she was absolutely distraught. And I remember she came to me and said, I just feel so cheated and so angry that, I was so worried and did all this and with my community in the church praying for her. And it turned out it was a big lie. But I said to Ruby, she didn't have cancer, but she obviously wasn't well, because who does that? Those actions, the lying and all the rest of it, are not the actions of a person who's in good mental health, actually. So, but anyway, there you go. So it just really struck me as like how often these things happen.
Yeah, I wonder how often they do happen. I mean, it's interesting that you say you trust people, don't you? Because yes, collectively and generally speaking, we do, and our sector is stuffed full of compassionate people who want to be the best in others, and that's a really attractive destination for those who want to exploit others. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago about Peter Murrell, Mr. Nicholas Sturgeon, and how he was, in plain sight, embezzling all sorts of money for all sorts of different things and being plausible as he went about it. I suppose there is a question about how assertive to be about checking what people are up to. We increasingly allow and enable people to work the hours that suit them in the locations which they wish to work. And you've talked very persuasively on this podcast about the productivity gains of enabling people to operate with confidence. But of course, there are other people who've had their fingers burnt by situations such as this, who might be listening to what you're saying and thinking, oh, well, she should have seen it coming, and that went on for ages and there were enough warning signs. Who are the sorts of people who, at the extreme will put spyware on the computers and make sure people are at their desks for fixed hours and all the rest of it. And these are all attempts to counterbalance the exploitative tendencies that some individuals have. So, what do we learn from these sorts of cases? Are they exceptional, or do they suggest that sometimes we are a bit too reasonable in expecting that everyone is acting with the best of intents?
Well, even after that, Peter, I still believe that we have to trust people, because actually I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people over the years in different ways, and that's the first that's
the one you found.
Yeah, that's that. So, and also it makes me think a bit about benefit fraud. Actually, it's like the amount of money we spend chasing down people who are claiming an extra 50 quid a week or what have you, the additional cost of that compared to actually the size of the fraud. And so what we do is we create, in order to prevent the bad uns, of which there are a few but not many, what we do is we create systems that disadvantage everybody. So everybody is treated with distrust. And I think there's it depends what you mean by balance. What you want to do is make it harder for people to cheat and lie and steal. Of course you do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I still think that we have to start with an assumption, because if everybody you meet, you just assume they're on the take or they can't be trusted, or you have to check. What a miserable way to live.
Yeah. I guess I'm with you temperamentally, but at the same time, there are these occasions. We're talking about the ones that have been spotted, and there will be some people that have, perhaps not on the scale that you're describing or has happened in this particular case, who will have cut corners or done things in the individual rather than corporate or collective benefit. And I suppose a healthy culture sees and spots and records, formally or informally, things which don't seem quite right, and these patterns of behaviour. I guess the skill to all of this is spotting patterns of behaviour earlier than the moment they run off with all the money or almost bankrupt the charity.
I think you're right. But again, it's you have to have checks and balances, because it's a bit like the open petty cash box. It's too tempting for people just half inch a pound or something, for their trolley in the supermarket, what have you. So you lock the petty cash box, so you don't put people in a position where their inner devil might overtake their good judgment. And that does, of course, that happens. That's normal human beings. We're not perfect saints who are never tempted to do things that we shouldn't do. So you put in those, but you put those in really to protect people from themselves, not to protect you from people, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I guess it does.
But that reminds me of another story, actually. Sorry. Oh, go on. You go.
No, well, I'm not sure I've told this story before. I was trying to think of odd, inexplicable behaviours that I've come across during my time, and I can't remember if I told this one before, but there was an occasion when I was looking for a personal assistant to work for me, and the basic skills you need were to be extremely organised, on time, make sure that I'm on time, got what I need at the moment that I need it, be a kind of calm presence across an extremely kind of busy life. And this one candidate, she turned up about 20 minutes late for the interview because she'd gone to the wrong place. She arrived incredibly flustered, even before I'd had a chance to ask if she was okay, and hear her explanation for why she wasn't where she needed to be at the time she needed to be, which was the essence of the job that she'd applied for. She went off on one about how she got extremely stressed in situations where she had to think about 2 or 3 things at the same time. And I'm thinking, I don't even think I need to get to the first question, because you are displaying here exactly the qualities that we don't want, and we want to kind of eliminate from my life, and you're already amplifying them through your own behaviour. So that was a sort of strange moment when I thought, you're not the right person in the right place at the right time.
Well, we had this chap at DSC. He was absolutely lovely, really hardworking, wonderful chap. But we had a rule at DSC that you had to. So we had badges, and you had to wear your badge. And the reason behind it was because we were a public building, so we had delegates, wandering in and out. This is when we were back at Stevenson Way. We had delegates wandering in and out, popping into the bookshop, walking past reception. And so our staff were constantly bumping into strangers. And so we did it so that anybody who bumped into one of the members of staff knew that they were a staff member, knew their name, and could ask them a question, what have you. But when I introduced it, there was some resistance, Peter, because this is like Big Brother sort of having things forced upon us, and why should I have to wear it, etc. And there was this lovely chap, who really was lovely, honestly, but people can be weird about some stuff. He really objected to wearing his badge, and so what he did is he took to wearing it on his belt.
Okay.
You see, which of course defeated the entire object, because it needed to be where people could see it. And he was spoken to several times about this, the badge situation. And in the end, the way I dealt with it, which I'm sure I probably would get into terrible trouble for now, but I said to him, I won't say his name, let's call him, I don't know, Philippe, for example. So I said to him, Philippe, why are you keeping your badge on your belt? And I said, I'm just saying, because it means that anybody who wants to know your name has to look down in that general area. Is that what you're hoping for? You know what I mean? And then literally he went bright red, and the badge never ever appeared on his belt again. But it's like, it was, I don't know, maybe that was a bit manipulative, but to try anyway. But it was just the oddness of like this little flurry of rebellion, was to just wear his badge in a completely different place or where you couldn't see it.
And what's your feeling about cameras on or cameras off in meetings? Because that has been an interesting and increasingly sort of topical through lockdown and out the other side dilemma between personal preference and collective
no
engagement.
Peter. At DSC, it's very clear your camera is on if you are in a meeting,
right?
Unless you're breastfeeding, in which case then it's your choice. Not that we, object to it. If you want to, that's fine. But otherwise, but no, absolutely, because not having a camera on, it's like sitting in a room with a paper bag over your head. I've said this before, when nobody can see you, and it's just, and I find it. Because I know lots of people say, oh, well, I can't cope with being seen and stuff like that. But actually, when we were in the workplace, you had to be seen.
Yes.
When you walked into the office, physically, everybody looked at you. So what the hell's the difference with a camera? I mean, there are, fair enough, some people, like one of my colleagues really suffers with migraines. And so occasionally he'll say, please can I switch my camera off so I don't have to be looking at the screen, which is absolutely fine and very legitimate. But he does that very rarely. Most of the time he will. So I'm really clear about it. It's like, because you miss so much communication, even from shoulders up, when you can't see people's faces, And the other thing is, Peter, to be perfectly honest, is also, and I'm now going to completely contradict what I said before, is when the camera isn't on, it's very easy not to pay attention and do other stuff because nobody can tell, nobody can see. Because we even have a rule at DSC, which is you have to be present in the meeting. And it's very obvious if someone's reading something else or answering an email or dealing with a different issue. So, no, we're very clear, cameras on, and be in the meeting, just as you would have to be in the meeting if you were in the physical office.
Well, I think that's really good. I agree 100%. But that a couple of years ago, I think was would have been a very controversial thing to say.
Yeah.
Perhaps people are coming to terms with that sort of sense of being present now, and it's obviously it's much easier to be somewhere other than where you should be. Doing something. So and another odd one that I came across was an appointment that we made to someone who was going to work remotely. They were providing an expert service. It was a full-time specialist job, so they could be needed at short notice to respond to something important to the organization. And it emerged pretty early on that they weren't they never answered their phone immediately. They weren't always available. They would come back reasonably swiftly, but they didn't turn things around as quickly as they might have done either. And fair play to the line manager in question. And there was a lot of noise about that lent itself to we must be compassionate to this person because they've clearly got a complicated life and things are going on and all the rest of it. But fair play to the curious line manager who discovered their name. I can't remember. It was on a document in this expert sort of territory for another organization. And it turned out they were doing another full-time job in another place. So because it was during their probation period and it found out quite quickly, then the contract could be terminated immediately. But that was an interesting fraudulent attempt to provide an expert full-time service to two different organizations and claim to be available sort of 24/7 for each of them.
But clearly it didn't work, Peter, because they got caught out, didn't
they? Got caught out. But I wonder, how long they might have got away with it, or if there are other people doing that kind of thing because the managers in question are insufficiently curious or tolerant through a probation period in particular, or compassionate because there's all this noise about what's going on in people's lives. I guess we have to be...
curious is a good word.
Curious. We want to be trusting, but not.
Yeah, but you can be curious by, are you okay? Like you were a bit late with all of that. What's going on? Is it, so it's that sort of curious, isn't it? But it's but actually it's because we don't count hours at DSC, as you know. We people just need to get work done. They need to turn up to the meetings they turn up. They've got to check in at various times. But other than that, we wouldn't have a clue whether they were working or not. But we do have a clue because it's very, very clear when things aren't being done.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
there was a performance issue to be spotted.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. So that's how that got through. Whereas at DSC, our staff, because our rule basically is 35 hours over 4 days, but we won't count your hours. So we trust you to just get the job done. And so some people, like who've got kids, for example, have to disappear off to school sports day or what have you, and they don't want to take holiday. That's fine, but they just have to make sure the work gets done anyway. And we say that so the only time we would discuss your hours with you is if your performance is falling under, and then the first question we'll ask is, are you doing your hours? Now, I'm sure some people some days don't do all the hours, but other days they probably do slightly more. It all balances out, but the work's being done. Sorry, you're going to ask me something.
I was just going to say, what's ironic about this particular individual is that there probably are ways in which you can organise your business through some kind of call-off contract, where it would actually be desirable to know that you were drawing on the expertise of someone who was working for 3 or 4 organisations, and that you would tolerate waiting a little bit longer to get their response. Because
but in that case, be a consultant, Peter.
Exactly, and and it's on a kind of pay-as-you-go thing, rather than claiming that you are working full-time for a particular organisation.
You do wonder what's going on in that individual's life. Like, what level of desperation do you have to get to? Because I always assume that it's not bad-minded greediness, that it's, I've got to find a way to pay off a debt or get myself.
I don't know. Yeah, it might be, or it might just be entrepreneurial.
Well, possibly, but I always incline to that. It's like when my nieces and nephews would talk about, when they were young in primary school, they talk about the horrible kid in the class, and I'd always be, what's going on for that kid? Because it's not natural for a 9-year-old to be, horrible in the way you're describing, to be bullying and manipulative. So what's going on in their life? Is there anything going on? I think we always have to start with, in fact, actually, this will make me laugh. I always say this as well to chief executives when they moan about their chairs or their boards. I always say, what's going on in their life that has them behave like such a dick? Start from there. Start from trying to understand the human being before you start,
I do.
Formal grievances.
I do agree with you, but at the other end of the spectrum, I am remembering a story that my dad told me once. So my dad was a teacher at our school, old school, traditional, slightly got sort of swept away by these modern, newfangled young people who came in and sort of took over the school and had bright ideas like taking an interest in what was going on in your kids' lives, which is unfair on my dad because he was very... he was sensitive to kids, and I think was a good teacher. But one of these newfangled senior managers who he had to report to had kind of come into the school, and the naughtiest boy in the school had kicked another boy, and the new modern teacher had said to the boy who had kicked the other boy, "What are you trying to say to me, Scott?" But by that action, and the kid just looked completely bewildered. I mean, he didn't like the other kid, so he kicked him. But what is it that you're trying to say? What are you expressing in your life through this act of violence? And this to my dad was just the kind of nonsense liberal takeover of just set some standards and get on with teaching the kids who want to be taught.
That's a very good point to end on, I think, Peter.
Well, I wish you well. Have a good weekend.
And
anything planned?
No, weather's going to be quite nice. Oh yes, I do actually. Why am I saying that? I've got going down to my sister's having a party to celebrate her 25th wedding anniversary and her birthday, which is on Monday. So, well, it's not going to be lovely at all. I love my sister to bits, but she's got quite a small garden and she's invited 50 people who have all said they're going to come. I mean, I'm just praying that some of them don't turn up, because how the hell we're all going to squish into her house and garden is a mystery to me. But anyway, so it's going to be an adventure, Peter. And I have to leave Andy at home because she's banned dogs, because she says, with that many people in the garden, dogs are going to be a hazard, both to themselves and to the people there. So I'm leaving Andy with the dog.
So you're without dog. We are without young person, because he's away with some of his friends. Somewhere. What could possibly go wrong? We'll see. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
All right.
Bye,
then. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.